in many instances, Browning wrenches us into a troubled private history by making that history work itself out before us. It is the method of Sir Walter Scott returned to its proper origins in the drama of Shakespeare and remolded into single charged incidents recounted by single expressive voices, even when Browning's soliloquizers are not known historical figures, as in the instances of an unnamed monk in his Spanish cloister, or the bishop orders his tomb, or he establishes a physical context through carefully selected details, references, or objects. Now, this is important. None floats in the relatively unlocated realms of Tennyson's Ulysses and Tithonus. That there is a difference between Tennyson and Browning. And what's the difference? There is a difference between Tennyson and Browning. What's the difference? Browning builds his poem on a physical basis, whereas Tennyson floats on airy isles. So that's why Browning will always have a physical background to his monologues, and Tennyson is more abstract, more philosophical, more smoky, and more non-tangible, as it were. And each of these speaking voices is given an individual articulation, a turn of phrase, an emphasis, a pause, a reiteration, or an idiolect which serves to identify them. Significantly, most of them are connoisseurs like the Duke, artists, musicians, thinkers, or even, in the case of Mr. Sludge, the medium manipulators. A creativity, or at least an appreciation of the creative process, marks the individuality of one of them. This is important. Please understand this. Browning's characters are either artists or connoisseurs of arts or worshippers of aestheticism, all sculptors or themselves. So somehow this kind of characterization comes partly from Browning's fascination with Italy, or something that I have been calling Italophilia, a love for Italy, a fascination for Italy. And so this Italophilia takes us to almost, I don't know how many of you would be able to relate, but those who have seen La Casa de Papel of Alex Pina, they would connect Browning's characters with a particular character called Berlin Fanolosa, an Italian connoisseur of art in Alex Pina's Money Heist. So therefore, Browning is someone who would always place a character who would be a lover of art, who would be artist himself, who would be connoisseur of art, or something like that. So this is something that you can explain as part of Browning's Italophilia. বউয়ের সাথে ইটালিতে ছিল, বউ কতটা প্রভাব ফেলেছিল জানি না, তবে ইটালি ব্রাউনিং এর উপর অনেক প্রভাব ফেলেছিল, এটা নিয়ে কোনো সন্দেহ নেই। এলিজাবেথ ব্যারেট ব্রাউনিং এর কোনো ছাপ ব্রাউনিং এর উপর পাওয়া যায় কিনা জানি না, তবে ইটালি যে প্রচুর প্রভাব ফেলেছিল ব্রাউনিং এর উপরে, সেটা নিয়ে কোনো ডাউট, কোনো ইয়ে নেই। ইউ ক্যান সি ইটালি ইন অল দ্য পোয়েমস অফ রবার্ট ব্রাউনিং, all the poems, yes, all the poems of Robert Browning. And these poems of Browning's, which dispense with an identified persona as narrator, generally retain a conversational directness. Now this is important. Browning's poems celebrate a conversational directness and even an easy familiarity between addresser and addressee. Even a very easy familiarity between addresser and addressee. Okay, and some and you can see this attribute in poems like the Lost Leader, De Gustivus, Two in the Campagna, Home Thoughts from Abroad, The Pied Piper of Hamelin, Child Roland to the Dark Tower came. Now I would invest a lot of time, on Child Roland to the Dark Tower came. Let's focus on Browning's Child Roland to the Dark Tower came. Browning's, it's a very interesting work of Robert Browning. Remember this work and read this work if you have time in future. Child Roland to the Dark Tower came. Browning's most elusive and suggestive poem, Child Roland to the Dark Tower came, has a first-person narrator who draws us into his quest by suggesting an airy Gothic response to an already posed question. The poem takes its suggestive title from one of Edgar's songs, King Lear, but the line provides merely a footing on which Browning builds a complex fabric vaguely medieval in its setting. This poem is extremely Gothic in nature. Remember that. This poem is extremely Gothic in nature. Okay. See, I am reading out some of the lines of Child Roland to the Dark Tower came. It may have been a water rat I speared, but look, it sounded like a baby shriek. Toads in a poison tank, or wildcats in a red hot iron cage. You can feel the Gothic ambience of the poem. In a sense, the poem circles back to its title as the knight blows his slow horn, announcing both his presence and his recognition of how and why he framed his journey. Unlike the narrators of Browning's other poems, the very strangeness of the knight and his quest preclude the familiar. A reader is alienated. So there is alienation of the reader. By the way, this poem, Child Roland to the Dark Tower came, uh, um, could very well suggest a hint of a kind of poetry to come in the earlier part of the 20th century, that is the modernism. So, Child Roland to the Dark Tower came could very well suggest or bring a kind of an early hint of modernist poetry of the early 20th century. Okay, I will take questions if you have any. Any challenge? Is there any challenge? Any question? Any doubts? Any suggestions? No. Okay. Let's move into the following history of the Victorian English literature. Let's come back to the or should not say come back. Let's uh, uh, proceed with the Victorian literature, and our focus is now on Victorian melodrama and a particular subgenre of Victorian literature, that is sensational novel. Now, there are few very important sensational novelists. There is a particular subgenre in Victorian literature called sensational novels. Now, who are these sensational novelists? As far as I can remember, there are three sensational novelists in Victorian age. So before I begin the lecture, let me officially clarify that this lecture is based on a Victorian genre called sensational novel. There is a particular Victorian genre called sensation novel, quote unquote sensation novel. And there are three premier sensation novelists during the mid-Victorian England. Who are they? Most obviously, the most famous one is Wilkie Collins. Second one is Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and the third one is Philip Meadows Taylor. And what are the titles of the sensational novels of the mid-Victorian England? The titles are The Frozen Deep, The Lighthouse, No Name, The Moonstone. These are four very important Victorian novels. They are called sensational novels written by Wilkie Collins, out of which The Moonstone is probably the most controversial one. And there is another sensational novelist called Mary Elizabeth Braddon. And the most famous of her sensational novels is Lady Audley's Secret. And also, a little bit mention should be made of The Doctor's Wife. Finally, the last sensation novel is Philip Meadows Taylor. And what's the name of his sensation novel? Confessions of a Thug. Now, before I finish up this lecture, let me clarify three features of the sensation novels of the mid-Victorian literature. The first important feature is their setting. Mostly they have exotic setting. What is the exotic setting? Exotic setting is the setting mostly of India. Whenever we use the word exotic setting, usually we refer to colonized locales, the locales of Africa, the locales of India, the locales of Latin Americas. They are the exoticized Orients of West European phallic fantasy. So I will be talking about two novels, The Moonstone and The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins and Confessions of a Thug by Philip Meadows Taylor. Let's talk about Moonstone. Wilkie Collins's masterpiece, The Moonstone, is a multiple narrative which subtly explores the nature of detection and the vagaries of memory and observation. Its Oriental background, be very careful, its Oriental background and its play with the effects of opium on the consciousness contribute an element of the exotic to an otherwise severely disciplined and stably plotted pursuit of the science of detection. এই জন্য অনেকেই বলেন নাকি ইংলিশ লিটারেচারে যদি ডিটেকটিভ নোভেলের জনকে আইডেন্টিফাই করা হয় অরিজিন হিসেবে, তাহলে এসে আমরা থামবো উইলকি কলিন্স এবং পার্টিকুলারলি মুনস্টোন। So the British detective novel as a genre owes its origin to Wilkie Collins, The Moonstone, in the year 1868. Wilkie Collins remains the first and undoubtedly the greatest of many English masters of the detective story. If we go back a little bit, his novels actively appealed to the demand of the 1860s for what has become known as sensation fiction. Stories centered on theft, deception, or murder, and during the course of which the nature of the crime and the motives of the criminal are revealed. Such sensationalism can be related both to the popular taste for melodrama and to the influence of the criminal fiction of French writers Eugene Sue and his English imitator G.W.M. Reynolds. I'm interested in this particular section. Why was crime thrillers, detective narratives, murder mysteries becoming popular during the mid and mid-late Victorian England? It's because the mid and mid-late Victorian period saw highest point, should I say almost a zenith of industrialization and urbanization. So what happens when urbanization and industrialization during the 1850s, 1860s and 1870s accelerated? It resulted in inequality of wealth. It resulted in the inequality of wealth. So there was urban poverty. There were murders. There were betrayals. And urban crimes kept increasing through the 1850s, through the 1860s, through the 1870s. So what happened when we have a detective fiction? I have a theory about detective fiction. What happens when the detective fictions come along? The novels usually deal with murders, crimes. And what happens when murders and crimes take place? The society becomes destabilized. And what happens in a detective novel? A detective comes and solves all the problems. And as a result, when you read the detective novel, as a member of that society, you feel reassured. You feel reassured that there is a man who is a detective, who is an investigator magistrate, who would always come and solve the mysteries and bring the order back to the society. Therefore, detective novels tend to carry the myth of a false promise of restoration of order.
As like Singham and Singham Returns likes movies.
Yes, exactly.
In which Ajay Devgan promises us that the law and the order will maintain and will be safe in our society.
Yes, exactly. And that's why we have plenty of
Jolly LLB2 or
absolutely Jolly LLB2 or the plenty of police stories that Bollywood keep churning out in urban crime scenes. Because similarly, during the mid-late Victorian England, I mean the 1850s, the 1860s, the 1870s, the period from 1850s to 1870s, that saw plenty of urban crimes happening all over England, particularly the urban locales. Churi, chintai, murder, rape, loot, ঠক সর্বত্র প্রত্যেকটা যে শহরে যত বেশি ইন্ডাস্ট্রিয়ালাইজেশন হচ্ছে, যত বেশি আরবানাইজেশন হচ্ছে, সেখানে চুরি ছিনতাই ঘটনাগুলো ক্রমাগত বাড়ছে. So when a novelist writes a detective story and brings a detective, and a detective comes, and at the end of the novel he solves the mysteries of murder or of theft or of robbery, and reader of the mid-Victorian England, I repeat, the reader of the mid-Victorian England felt reassured having read those detective novels of Wilkie Collins, of Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and the other guy called Philip Meadows Taylor. No wonder that reassurance of the restoration of order, of the myth of the reassurance of the restoration of Victorian order, appealed to the Victorian readers during the 1850s, 1860s, and 1870s. And that's why these kind of detective narratives became tremendously popular through those 1850s and 1860s. And this is how I explain the success of The Moonstone by William Wilkie Collins in 1868 probably. Yes, 1868. Let's focus a little bit on Philip Meadows Taylor. Much of the Indian material that Wilkie Collins, oh, another thing, why do these novelists use India as the background? They use India as the background because somehow in the imagination of the Victorian readers, India sat as a kind of a hotbed of crimes and these thieves. মানে যত চুরি, ছিনতাই, ডাকাত, মার্ডারার, ধর্ষক সব ভারতবর্ষেই আছে, এবং সেই জন্য এদের ওরিয়েন্টাল এক্সোটিক ইন্ডিয়ান ব্যাকগ্রাউন্ড গুলো ভিক্টোরিয়ান বুর্জোয়া রিডারকে আরো বেশি অ্যাপিল করেছিল. And that's why both the novels, both the bestsellers of Wilkie Collins's The Moonstone and Philip Meadows Taylor's Confessions of a Thug, both had India as the city. এমনকি ফিলিপ মিডোস টেলরের সেটিংটা তো হায়দ্রাবাদের নিজামের একজন কর্মচারী অফিসার ছিলেন. উনি লিখছেন যে উনি একবার অ্যারেস্ট করেছিলেন একটা মুসলিমকে, নাম আমির আলী. তাকে বলা হচ্ছে তুমি স্বীকার করো কি দোষ করেছো? আমির আলী বলছে আমি যা করেছি বেশ করেছি, আরো করব, আরো খুন করব. তার মানে they were showing Muslims in the 19th century British India as criminals.
Sir, it also says that xenophobia.
Yes. I explain this kind of narrative of Confessions of a Thug through two terminologies, xenophobia and Islamophobia. Xenophobia, obviously the British Victorian England had that thing against India, and they exoticize and orientalize it. And Islamophobia, always you think Muslims to be as terrorists or as criminals or as something else, and you treat them as that. No, this is wrong. This is essentialism. There are terrorists in Hindus, there are terrorists in Muslims, there are terrorists in all religions. If you generalize, you are unfortunately essentializing. And বলার অপেক্ষা রাখে না, mid-Victorian England only essentialized the British India's Muslims. Let's read it. Much of Indian material that Wilkie Collins used with such effect in the Moonstone may well suggest a date to the most remarkable fiction account of the thugism of British India. Philip Meadows Taylor's Confessions of a Thug. It's highly individual and often exotically charged crime novel, which draws from Taylor's detailed knowledge of India and of the murderous cult of Thagi that British administration had fought hard to suppress between 1810 to 1830s. এই থাগিরা ছিল সবাই মুসলিম, প্রসঙ্গত বলে রাখি। এদের একটাই কাজ ছিল, ওদের ধারণা ছিল ভিক্টোরিয়ানদের এরা সবাই খুন করে, মার্ডার করে, খুন মার্ডার ছাড়া এরা কিছু করতে জানে না, আর খুন মার্ডার করতে এদের খুব ভালো লাগে। ইনফ্যাক্ট এই ভিক্টোরিয়ান ধারণা নিয়ে অনেক হিন্দু এখনো বসে আছে। And Taylor, who had worked for the Nizam of Hyderabad as an assistant superintendent of police, gives his vivid story the form of the supposed confessions of the captive leader, the band of thugs. নামটা দেখে আমি একটু অবাক হইনি, আমির আলী, to an unnamed British officer. I expect such xenophobia, I expect such Islamophobia from the bloody Victorian novelists. To an দুঃখের বিষয় হলো, আমি লাইভে রেকর্ডে বলতে চাই, এই ভিক্টোরিয়ান মানসিকতা নিয়ে ভারতবর্ষের বোধহয় 90% হিন্দু এখনো বসে আছে। তাই অনেকেই ক্যালেন্ডার ব্যবহার করে 21st century, but they should use the calendar of 1850s and 1860s and 1870s. And Amir Ali expresses few regrets for his career, glorifying as his calm interlocutors in describing the minutest particulars of his victims and the share he had in the destruction, which scarcely symptoms or remorse. বলছে আমির আলীর কোনো লজ্জা দুঃখ নেই খুন করেছে বলে। এটা নিয়ে ভিক্টোরিয়ান রিডাররা শিউরে উঠেছিল, ওই রকমই হয় ওরা। The central characters, Swagger, and his often arch language and English rendering of a pure and fluent Urdu, a little affected by his knowledge of Persian, served to enhance the novel's distinctive evocation of an otherness. This is how Victorians othered xenophobia and Islamophobia, the Indians and the Muslim Indians. Otherness, both in Ali's culture and to Victorian English eyes, in his decidedly alien religious morality. Two words are important. The Victorians saw us as aliens, as xenophobic, through their xenophobia and Islamophobia, they saw us as aliens and as others.
Other.
Yes.
Edward Sayyid Orientalism is completely.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Then আরেকটা জায়গা ছিল আমার।
Yes, exactly.
That.
Yes.
আপনার টেলরের যে জায়গাটা বললেন, নিজাম অফ হায়দ্রাবাদে তার এক লাইন উপরে 1810 and the early 1830s যে এরিয়াটার কথা বলতো, অ্যাকচুয়ালি সে এরিয়াটা তো আপনার ব্রিটিশ এরিয়াতে, সেটা আপনার রোমান্টিক এজ ছিল।